Welcome to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco, bringing you interviews with industry experts and regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land your job interviews in 60 days, guaranteed. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
Hello, everyone. I am Virginia Franco, and welcome to the Resume Storyteller podcast. Today, I want to talk through a question that I get all the time, which is how far back should my resume go? And for that matter, my LinkedIn go. There's a lot of talk about age discrimination. And when it comes to writing a resume, so many people struggle with deciding, how far is too far. 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s. For a lot of people, the idea of not including earlier experience, particularly when, you view it as really critical to who you are today, or, there was a big win back when, it's just a tough pill to swallow. So by and large, I am an advocate of devoting the majority of your real estate. Let's face it, you usually only have 2 pages to sort of detail your entire blood, sweat, and tears career-wise on your resume. So you want to devote the majority of the real estate of your resume to what happened most recently. Sort of conventional wisdom says to go back about 15 years. So it's about to be 2020, which means you really should focus on what happened between 2005 and now. I want to sort of walk you through why I think the past 15 years makes the most sense, but discuss some workarounds to help you, maybe get your cake and eat it too, so to speak, so that some of the earlier stuff can get included. And then lastly, I'll throw in my 2 cents about my thoughts on how to approach this topic when you are writing your LinkedIn profile. So, the case for going back just 15 years on a resume, in my view, is this. What I know happens, whether someone is discriminating or not, is that when they see stuff that is much older than 15 years ago, and they see dates associated with that, their brains sort of unwittingly go down into a rabbit hole. Here's what that rabbit hole looks like. It's filled with questions where someone's like, oh, I wonder how old that person is. I wonder how old their kids are. I wonder when they went to school. The rabbit hole is more of a human nature idiosyncrasy than an intentional age discrimination issue. And it can be avoided by using some techniques that I'll discuss later in the podcast. But it happens. And when you just have, 6 to 10 seconds to make an impression, who wants 2 or 3 seconds spent in that rabbit hole? You just can't afford it. The second key reason why it is important to focus mostly or primarily on the most recent 15 years is because the fact that age discrimination does happen, whether we like it or not. Whether you want to work for a company that doesn't value your years of experience, it's just a topic for a whole nother podcast. But, the goal of the resume, in addition to sort of getting the reader to want to obviously pick up the phone and call you, is to make you timeless. When I'm writing, I don't want anyone to know if you are 35 or 85. Because at this point, that's not important. You want the document to focus on your achievements so that the person wants to give you a quick call after they've done a skim read. And when someone goes in that rabbit hole, or when someone sees that you've been working since 1976, you're giving away your age. So what I do as a workaround is embrace the earlier experience section. I'm a huge proponent of including an earlier experience section below the regular experience. And it is a great tool to be able to, select earlier roles that add skill diversity that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been known, or lend some additional credibility to your skills. Either way, it sort of advances the story that I'm trying to craft. So I'll give you a couple of examples of where an earlier experience section makes sense. Let's say you want to be known as a leader, or you want to move into a leadership role, and you've been an individual contributor. Let's say you were in sales, you've been a rep your whole life, and you want to move into leadership, but you maybe were in the military back at the very beginning, back pre-2005. Military leadership is a great way to sort of showcase leadership, but you don't want to show that it happened back when, so you include it under an earlier experience category. Additionally, anything with the military experience always, it's impressive. It resonates with the reader. Another example of when I will include an earlier experience section is when I want to show that the person has learned their industry sort of from the bottom up. So let's say you were, you're a CFO, but you got your start as a CPA in public accounting. And then maybe moved into FP&A, manager, and then you were VP of finance. So showing the earlier titles under your earlier experience category show the reader that you understand the ins and outs of that industry, and its quirks and its nuances. The other times when I will consider incorporating certain roles in the earlier experience section is when I want to try to position someone as being industry neutral. So let's say you have been in financial services for the last 15 years, but you want to try to make a move to a new industry. And your earlier experience, maybe you worked in, entertainment, or you worked in medical device. So showing the titles and the names of the companies that you worked with earlier sort of show that you have been able to jump successfully from industry to industry. So that is valuable. And so if it advances the narrative, again, that I'm trying to showcase here, then I'm going to include it. The last time when it makes sense for me to include an earlier experience section is when I'm trying to name drop. And that's when someone has worked with some really big companies to sort of show that you really know the industry inside and out because you worked with all these different companies. So, and let's say, for instance, let's say you were in you're in tech. In the last 15 years, you worked in the mid-sized company or startup space, but back at the beginning, you worked at Google or Amazon or one of those. That's a name that you want to drop, and I don't want to omit it just because it happened earlier than 15 years ago. So another example of where an earlier experience, where something should be or could be included in an earlier experience category. Again, it's think about what your target is, the story that you're trying to craft, and think about which role from pre-15 years ago advance that narrative. So, I'm talking all about this earlier experience section. I'm sure you're asking, well, if it's under earlier experience and they know what happened during the past, prior to 15 years ago. So here, it's true that they're going to know what happened more than 15 years ago, but they don't need to know exactly when it happened. And for some reason, removing the dates from those experiences sort of eliminates that rabbit hole phenomenon, and it mitigates the reader's mind from sort of going into an age discrimination mindset as well. So how an earlier experience section works is that, number one, I want to identify any roles, company names, et cetera, any experience that, again, advances or reinforces the story that I'm trying to tell based on my client's target. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to synopsize what happened during that experience. Sometimes I don't want to include anything more than a name and a job title. If there is a noteworthy achievement, 1 or 2 lines max is more than enough to explain the point that makes this role worth including. When it comes to synopsizing, I'm going to selectively sort of bold, whatever point is most salient. So if I want to highlight the company names, because I'm name dropping, I'm going to bold the company names. If I'm trying to show that you knew the industry from the ground up, I'm going to bold the job title. But it's so important to synopsize because we don't have a lot of space to work with. Remember, we have devoted the majority of the real estate to what's happened since 2005. So this last little section is just, a couple inches long. You should not take up as much room for a role that happened back in 1996 as you do with a role that happened in 2016. Lastly, I think I mentioned it, but it bears repeating, you want to remove the dates. Again, removing the dates from this helps the reader to bypass the rabbit hole, and that's what we're going for. When it comes to LinkedIn, things are a little different because people read LinkedIn differently than they do resumes. With the resume, you've got the whole thing opened up on your phone or on your laptop, or you've got it printed out and you are scanning. With LinkedIn, though, obviously it's exclusively online, but the readers usually hook by your picture, your headline, and then they see the first little bit of the summary section, and then you click and you see just the first couple of roles. If you're hooked and you want to keep on reading more, you have to keep on clicking. So the fact that someone keeps on clicking means that they are interested, and you just by that fact probably help to bypass the rabbit hole phenomenon from even happening. So a long way of saying that if there is a really important role that really sort of cements the narrative that I'm trying to tell based on the target, keep going back to that, I am going to include it, and I'm going to include the dates because there's no way to include experience without including dates on LinkedIn. The system won't let you do it. I don't want to include roles on there just to include roles for roles' sake because, this is a fine line. I don't want you to appear to be, I don't want the age issue to come into play wherever I can. So I'm only going to include roles when they're really important. The bottom line is if it doesn't add a huge value add, you're going to err on the side of working to keep someone timeless to avoid the potential for age bias as much as possible. So I hope this discussion helps focus on the last 15 years in terms of giving a lot of detail. If there's stuff from before that that's important, stick it under that earlier experience category, synopsize it, and remove the dates. LinkedIn, be very selective about what you're going to choose. Because at the end of the day, this is all it's a balancing act with human nature and age bias on one side and stories and career points that advance your brand and your narrative on the other. So I hope that helps, and look for me next week.
You've been listening to Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's skim online readers, hiring and decision makers, go to www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.